We often think about trauma as a scar, something left behind by a really bad event. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if trauma isn't the event itself, but a whole structure built deep inside of us? That's exactly what we're going to explore today, the architecture of trauma. Okay, so right off the bat, let's just bust a huge myth. The common idea is that trauma is the bad thing that happened to you, right? But that's not the whole story. The truth, and this is the key to everything, is that trauma is the response of your nervous system. It's the energy that gets stored inside you when something was just too much, too fast, or too soon. So, what does that actually mean? It's the internal response? Well, for one thing, it means trauma has nothing to do with being strong or weak. You could have two people go through the exact same event, and their nervous systems might just handle it completely differently. It's all about what your system had the capacity for in that specific moment. And this is where we get to something called an incomplete experience. See, when your nervous system gets totally overwhelmed, it can't finish its natural biological response. Fight, flight, all of that. So the experience doesn't get neatly filed away as a memory that's over. Instead, it gets stuck. It becomes this ongoing pattern, like a loop of tension or vigilance that just keeps playing in the background. Which leads us right into the next piece of the puzzle, this whole pattern of repetition. Because think about it, that stored energy, that incomplete experience, it has to go somewhere, right? And it does. It shows up in our day-to-day lives, often in sneaky ways we don't even realize are connected to the past. Yeah, this quote absolutely nails it. We expect trauma to be this big, dramatic flashback with a clear story attached. But honestly, most of the time it's way more subtle than that. It's cyclical. It's that feeling of, why does the same thing keep happening to me? That's the repetition. So what does that repetition actually look like in real life? Well, maybe it's having a huge reaction to something that seems pretty small, or finding yourself in the exact same kind of painful relationship again and again. It could even be that constant nagging feeling that you're not safe, even when everything around you is totally fine, or, that impulse to shut down the moment someone gets too close. These aren't just weird personality quirks. They're echoes of that old, incomplete experience. And please, if you hear one thing today, let it be this. These patterns are not personality flaws. It does not mean you are broken. Not at all. They are learned adaptive responses from a nervous system that was doing its absolute best to keep you safe. Okay, so let's get into the why behind this. This is all about biology, not a flaw in your character. These are patterns of survival that get wired into us super early on, way before our logical thinking mind even comes online. From the moment we are born, our little nervous systems are like tiny detectives, asking fundamental questions to map out the world. The first question is a big one. Is this place safe or is it unpredictable? The answer it gets from the environment around it, well, that basically sets a core belief for life. Then comes the next question, which is just as critical. When I'm upset, does someone come to comfort me? Or am I just left all alone with these huge, overwhelming feelings? The answer to that one teaches us whether we can rely on other people to help us feel okay again. And the third big one, is connection something that's just there for me? Is it consistent or is it conditional? Something I have to earn by being good or being quiet? The answers to these simple questions build the entire foundation for how we relate to ourselves and to everyone else for the rest of our lives. So today, when you feel like your body is betraying you, like you can't control your reactions, I want you to try and remember this. Those reactions are actually brilliant adaptations that once kept you safe. Becoming a people pleaser, being hyper-aware of everything, making yourself small. Those weren't choices you made. They were survival skills. And here's a little map that shows you exactly why. The brain develops from the bottom up. The first part to come online is the brainstem. That's pure survival. Then you get the limbic system for regulation and emotion. And way, way at the top, last of the party, is the neocortex, your thinking, rational brain. What this means is that trauma can get wired into our core systems of safety and emotion long before we ever have words to make sense of what's happening. But here's where it gets even more complex. The architecture of our trauma, it doesn't always start with us, which brings us to inherited family burdens. Because sometimes what feels so intensely personal is actually part of a much larger story, one that moves quietly through entire families. This is a huge reframe, isn't it? That anxiety you carry or that pattern of shutting people out that you always beat yourself up for, what if it isn't just your personal stuff? What if it's systemic? What if it's part of a story you were simply born into? So how does that even work? Well, it gets carried in all sorts of quiet ways, through unspoken rules, like we just don't talk about anger in this family. It's passed down in emotional roles, like when a child unconsciously takes on their parents' unprocessed grief. It can even be something like a grandparent's intense survival instinct showing up in you as this constant, unexplainable sense of urgency. And this is why it can be so freeing to lift the weight of self-blame. So many of the symptoms we treat as our own individual failures are actually inherited burdens, passed down from generations who were just doing the best they could with what they had. Okay, so if all of that is the architecture of trauma, what on earth does the path to healing look like? Well, it's not about taking a wrecking ball to the old structure. It's more like consciously designing and building a new one. And real healing is not about forcing positivity or just telling yourself to get over it. It actually starts with the total opposite. It begins with getting really, really curious and accurately understanding the existing architecture, seeing where the trauma lives, when it was built, and why these patterns keep showing up. And when you do that, something amazing happens. That's a first beautiful step. When you can see your reactions not as flaws, but as adaptations, compassion just sort of naturally arises, because that accuracy about your past creates compassion for your present self. From that compassion, something incredible happens. You find a little bit of space, a tiny pause between the trigger and the reaction. And in that pause, for maybe the first time ever, you might notice the old impulse coming up and realize, hey, I don't actually have to follow that. Compassion creates choice. And every single time you make that new choice, to breathe instead of react, to stay present instead of shutting down, you are literally, physically carving new neural pathways in your brain. Choice creates new pathways. You are building a new architecture, one moment at a time. So there you have it. That's the architecture of trauma. It's not a story about being broken, but a story of brilliant adaptation. So the final question we'll leave you with is this. What happens when you stop fighting the structure and start to finally understand its blueprint?